Michael, I think a lot of people, when they hear about psychotherapy, they imagine that it's I can't turn that off. Okay. They imagine that it's a matter of feeling good about everything. This is a kind of popular conception. So one of the things about REBT is that there's no attempt to make people feel good about everything. In fact, negative thoughts about things are okay. Is that correct?
Yes, and before I answer that more completely, David, I just want to start with an introduction. And I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein. David here is David Ramsey Steele. We're authors of 3-Minute Therapy, a self-help book for emotional and behavioral problems. I have 40 years experience helping people with REBT, and you can find my practice link and our 3-minute therapy link in the description below. And you are correct, David, that just want to shut this off, that REBT sometimes is misunderstood as feel-good therapy, but it's not. There are appropriate, helpful, reasonable, negative emotions, which are important to have when negative things happen. And by negative things, I mean they go against your goals. And these emotions include frustration, disappointment, sorrow, regret, other appropriate, healthy, helpful negative emotions. So we don't want to abolish all negative emotions like it seems like the Buddhists do.
Right. So what do we want to do? We want to train people to think differently, to evaluate differently their negative emotions.
Yes. And in doing that, I think the first step is to uh, see where emotions come from. And our emotions, as we teach in rational emotive behavior therapy, come from our thinking, our views, attitudes, and beliefs, particularly evaluative thinking. So if you think, for example, it's a warm, sunny day, that in itself is just an observation, not going to create an emotion. But if you add an evaluation, isn't it lovely? Isn't it good? Isn't it nice? The sun is out. Then we've created an emotion, in fact, a positive one. Now, if it's raining and we say that's unfortunate, unpleasant, frustrating, then we'll have a appropriate negative emotion such as frustration or sorrow or regret. But people get themselves into trouble when they go beyond these reasonable emotions and preferences, and they escalate their preferences into demands, a must, a should, which tend to lead to global evaluations such as it's sunny out, that's preferable, and therefore it must stay sunny out. And if it doesn't, then my life is awful. I'm going to be miserable forever. So it's escalating your preferences into must that create the inappropriate, unhelpful, maladaptive, not in the Darwinian sense, emotions.
Right, right. Now, the other idea that is out there that it's possible to adopt a cheerful view about everything, including your own impending death, let's say, um, that is sometimes attributed to Buddhism. I'm not sure how authoritative that is. Maybe we could interview a Buddhist at some point. But one thing that interests me is the limits of this changes in evaluative thinking. Do you think, Michael, that it's possible for someone to feel totally indifferent to their fate, as seems to be suggested by the Buddhist idea of non-attachment?
Well, and I think, don't you, would you agree, David, that's in the Stoic ideal?
Yes, I mean, there are many great similarities between Stoicism and Buddhism, I think. Yes.
Yeah. And well, if if Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius claim that they've done that, I don't have any particular reason to question them. But in terms of myself in teaching clients how to feel totally indifferent, that's really beyond my abilities when things happen that normally you'd evaluate as bad. So I think it's almost second nature when something happens that impinges on your life to evaluate it and think it's bad or it's good.
Right. Right.
So I guess if there was an attempt to feel indifferent, it might involve making a list of the advantages of this event and the disadvantages. And if they were close, then you might feel closer to indifference.
Right, right. So, what about the idea that there are some emotional reactions to things that are so powerful and immediate, they seem to be instinctive? For example, fear, in my case, it would be fear of heights. I don't think I have an unusual degree of fear of heights, but I certainly wouldn't walk within 2 inches of the edge of a cliff. Um, and I'm rather reluctant to go into a glass elevator, especially one of these glass elevators that I've seen in movies that are on the outside of buildings. Um, there seems to be something, almost a bodily reaction that is immediate. And it seems a little bit hard to credit that we could fix that by changing our evaluations.
Uh, it seems that way, and certainly, uh, I don't think it's very likely you're going to change your evaluation on the spot when you find yourself looking out of a window on a tall building or confronted with a snake. But even those things, it is possible to change your evaluation. I had a client, I had a counseling center in New York in a more rural area. And I had a client who had a fear of snakes. And once in a while, she ran into snakes. And we got her over her fear using successive approximations where she went to a zoo and got closer and closer to the snake in the cage, and also did rational emotive imagery where she pictured uh, being confronted by snakes while saying rational statements to herself, such as, I prefer not to be bitten by the snake, but if I am, I am. Upsetting myself isn't going to help. And it's not the end of the world if I'm bitten by the snake. Even if it's a poisonous snake and I die, the world won't end. The world will go on. And especially the imagery and the successive approximations helped also. And I was telling you earlier about a situation where I had a fear of heights, and then using the imagery, I succeeded in going over a rickety bridge in Vancouver called the Capilano Bridge. So it's certainly possible when there's a cognitive intermediary between a situation and an emotion. I don't know of any cases where, with hard work and practice, you can't change the absolutistic evaluation. It must not happen. It's awful if it happens, to just, I strongly prefer it not happen. I strongly prefer I not die. But if I do, I do. I'm out of my pain. It's not the end of the world. It's the end of my world. But I won't be miserable forever. Thankfully, I'll be dead. So even in extreme cases like a fear of death, I believe with a lot of practice and work, you can change your emotion by changing your thinking.
Yes, I think the important thing there is that the the reaction that one feels when confronted with a terrifying situation, such as um, walking over that bridge in Vancouver, is very immediate. Uh, And nobody is suggesting that at that point you can do some mental gymnastics that will make that terror go away. That's not what REBT argues. What it argues is that when you're away from that bridge and you're thinking about it, you can do exercises over a period of time, perhaps a substantial period of time, 6 months or a year, that will mean that when you actually get into that situation, let's suppose you visit Vancouver once a year, um, you will be able to handle it a lot better. So it's, although it's an immediate, almost physiological response, you can modify that response by changing your attitudes and evaluations, uh, training yourself basically to have a different response. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I've worked with a number of people who have had a fear of flying, and that includes claustrophobia, feeling like they're trapped in the airplane once it takes off, and acrophobia, fear of heights, looking down when the plane takes off, who have successfully gotten over those fears and didn't have panic attacks on the plane, which they had in the past, as a result of, as you're saying, David, concerted, regular practice in thinking, changing their thinking through writing out the 3-minute exercises. Some people call it the ABCs, and imagery, and also successive approximations.
Right,
So,
right,
I think that if you do have these problems, through work and practice, you can make significant improvements on it.
right. I think we
So,
both knew someone who suffered from that fear of flying. That was Murray Rothbard, the late Murray Rothbard. And I believe it was true that when he wanted to go from New York to California, he would drive because he was so afraid of flying. I don't know um, whether he ever cured that problem. I know that he had therapy with Nathaniel Brandon, and I'm sure that didn't do him much good.
right, and
Completely mistaken methodology. But do you know what if he was able eventually to get rid of that problem?
I do not know. I do not
Mm.
know. In summary, then, adaptive, helpful negative emotions result when we evaluate certain situations as bad, unfortunate, regretful, because they block our goals, and we have inappropriate, unhelpful emotions. When we add to the negative evaluation, it's awful, it should not be, I can't stand it, I'm no good, you're no good, life is no good. So that leads to the emotional disturbance. But negative emotions are fine, and they tend to be motivating also. If you have a negative emotion about being unemployed, then that'll help motivate you to try to apply for jobs,
Right,
get job
right.
interviews, and those kinds of things. David, did you have any final words?
No, I think the upshot of all this is um, negative emotions, emotional feelings of disapproval um, are absolutely to be expected, and nobody in the REBT world is trying to find a cure for those. That's part of life, and we accept it. But when people uh, turn their preferences into musts, then they make problems for themselves. And so it's not the bad or negative feelings in them, the bad value judgments that are intrinsically bad for people. They're part of life. It's the awfulizing and the tendency to demand of the world that it be a certain way that leads to the really crippling emotional problems.
Exactly. Demand of the world, oneself, or others that lead to the
Mhm.
crippling emotional problems.
Well, good. Thank you very much,
You're
Michael.
welcome. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up and feel free to comment below. Suggest subjects that you'd like us to discuss in the future. Volunteer. We're always thirsty for volunteers. If you're a therapist and would like to discuss a clinical issue, we're happy to have you. Or if you're someone with clinical issues and you'd like the benefit of two brilliant REBT people, volunteer to come on and donate to Patreon to help support us. Subscribe to the 3 Minute Therapy podcast to stay on the rational side of life.